Welcome to Paranormal M, where every shadow holds a ghostly secret. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss out on our spine-tingling tales. Enjoy the thrill of the supernatural. Thought I'd share some interesting experiences. So growing up, we had lived in several different houses. My parents got an amicable divorce when we were young. That resulted in me and my younger brother jumping between our parents' houses. Our early life was mainly spent with our mom. She's lived in 2 separate houses, the second being the one where weird things happened. I'll split this into individual experiences. I'd love to hear thoughts, and I'd love to hear explanations. The house is a few hundred years old. Originally, when you went in, there was a small entryway with an archway to the kitchen on the left and a doorway with like a living room and a side room. I guess that was converted into 2 bedrooms. Those were on the right. Those both had their own doors. At the back of the kitchen was a toilet and a staircase that led to a staircase with a single bedroom. So, first up, my mom was dating a guy when she first moved. They had a weird series of events one night that ultimately led to him not wanting to stay anymore. While watching movies and TV one night, he had gone to the toilet, and passing through the corridor, he noticed a large painting had fallen face down on the floor. The painting was a clockmaker making a clock, in case anybody's curious. He put the painting back up and went to the toilet. On the way back, the painting was face down again. He went back into the living room and mentioned the painting must be loose. My mom then went to the toilet a little later, and once again the painting was back on the floor. She put it up again and checked the fixtures. This painting had been up for months. Everything was fine, and when she came back from the toilet, it was still up. She went into the living room and they continued watching their movie. He then goes to the toilet, and once again the painting is face down on the floor. He went back into the living room and accused my mom of trying to freak him out. Obviously, she was confused. But anyway, he put it back up and goes to the toilet. Once again on the way back, it was face down again. He was convinced my mom was playing a prank on him, so he put it back up and had like a whinge about her doing it to him. A little bit later, they were heading to go to bed together. And once again, the painting was on the floor, only this time the string on the painting was clearly cut in the center. Apparently, he didn't sleep much that night and rarely stayed over. I had several experiences, some odd, some terrifying. The side room that I mentioned was large. It had been converted to 2 rooms for my younger brother. I was up playing RuneScape one night as a kid. I had to go to the toilet. I'd logged out and ran to the toilet. When I got back, my account was logged back in on the welcome screen. It was a strange thing. Nobody knew my password. Possibly the most terrifying experience, and one of the most scary moments of my life. It happened during the day at the height of summer. By this time, I spent most of my time living with my grandparents around the corner. My mom said that this happened because I would complain about seeing a little girl in my bedroom, but I don't really remember it beyond one time where I'm pretty sure I dreamt about a small girl being in my room asking to play. I believe the real reason, I think it's because I could maybe sleep longer and couldn't get up with my mom at 6:30 for her work. But it was summer holidays and I'd gone round to play with my brother who still lived with my mom. When I went into the house, I called his name. There was nothing but silence. Then a noise came from what I thought was a living room. I went into the space between the living room and the bedrooms and called again. This time I clearly heard something shuffle from his bedroom, so I walked into his room. It was empty, but he had a raised bed with wooden storage underneath. Called for him once again and very clearly heard the shuffling move from under the bed. I assumed he was under there playing, as he had a little light. Walked over to the door and opened it up. It was just black. There's nobody in there, just a bunch of toys. I can't really put into words the feeling of dread and panic that I felt. It genuinely felt as though somebody had lured me there, to the furthest point of the house and into the darkness. I ran like hell, and on the way out I heard my brother talking. He was up in the garden with my mom doing some gardening. They were nowhere near the house. I didn't really spend much time in there the years that followed. My brother also began to stay at my grandma's. He did move back when he was around 15 or 16. I would stay there occasionally with my ex-girlfriend. My grandma's a Catholic and really didn't like the idea of me and my girlfriend sharing a bed before marriage. We had some strange experiences, but nothing overly notable other than one night. We were watching TV in what used to be the old room, or my old room. The door had frosted glass, and in the middle of the night we heard somebody walk up to the glass. I could see somebody appear in the room briefly before walking away. We'd assumed it was my mom checking if we were up there still, but we never really got confirmation. My mom usually would have come in and asked. While my mom and her current boyfriend were on holiday, I was asked to feed the dog, and maybe just let it out a couple of times a day. I'd done this many times in the past, and the dog would always come through whining and wagging its tail before jumping up at me. The dog's bowl was close to the toilet, so the opposite end of the kitchen. There's a side door next to it. I'd come down to this one particular day, and I was walking up to the house, and I had a weird, ominous feeling that I shrugged off. Went inside and called for the dog. It was silent. Walked through, could see the dog sat on the couch. It had clearly heard me. Called it again, and it climbed off the couch, but it wouldn't go into the kitchen. I was talking to the dog, as you do, and putting its food out. I stood next to the bowl, and I could see its head poking around the corner. I called for it again, and it just stared at me. No noise. It was bizarre. I just leaned against the wall and pulled out my phone. A few seconds later, the dog whined, and as I looked up at her, a big wood plank, I think they call them 2x4s. Indeed. It was propped up against the wall, flying down, and barely dodged it. Would have hit me had the dog not drawn my attention. The dog ran away, and I locked everything up and left as quick as I could. Here's another one of my mom's experiences. She was holding an 18th party for me. She had awkwardly printed various posters of me growing up and put them everywhere in the kitchen. She had just finished cleaning and prepping the house for the party. That's when she said that she sat down with a coffee in the kitchen. She'd never really gone into detail about what happened, but she said that she had an unnerving feeling. And suddenly, one by one, the picture of me all started to just fall off the walls. She's very skeptical as well, but I think she believes in it more than she lets on. She freaked out, put them all back up, and went to bed. The party was fine the next day, and she told me this a few months after. She actually had some mediums around for a girls' night sort of thing. She often antagonizes them because she doesn't believe them, but she likes the fun of it and her friends, and I guess they made the suggestion. There were two, a man and a woman. She had asked the man if he felt anything and said the house was clear. Everybody who had lived there was at peace. Towards the end of the night, as the mediums were leaving, the woman actually pulled my mom to the side and asked to speak in private. She said that the man had actually lied because he didn't want to scare her, but he's picked up a couple of spirits. She said one was a little girl who was, quote-unquote, so happy to have seen children return to the house, and also that, in quotes, she was sorry if she ever scared them. Finally, I told my mom that I kept dreaming about holding some sort of effigy in the house. I drew them for her, and she was panicked. She told me a few years back that she had bought some corn dollies a few years before moving in. She had stored them in the cellar. She said that they were identical to what I drew, and it freaked her out so much the next day she got rid of them in the cellar and burned them both. I still to this day don't like being there alone, but I do occasionally look after their new dog. There's other weird things that I'm forgetting, though I don't really believe I witnessed anything paranormal. I have to say, it scared me as a kid. I've had various weird things happen at many of the places I've lived at, and I'll share at some point. But I hope somebody finds these experiences interesting. I'm sick in bed and would love to read your ghost stories. What are your scariest experiences? In middle school, I became obsessed with playing Ouija board. Now, I do think that a lot of the time people are pushing the planchette, and there is something to be said about the ideomotor effect. That may be the case initially, but a friend of mine, I opened up ourselves to something far darker. The school year ended and the summer began. Played nearly every day with my friend. We made contact with a spirit whose name I will not repeat. Initially, we thought this was a good spirit, like trying to will us to, helping us uncool, slightly outcast boys. After my friend left town with his family to go to their country summertime share, I was left alone. This is when things started to take a dark turn. Initially, it was just things like small movements, shadows out of the corner of my eye, the closet door just slightly opening at night. Then things started to pick up. I had the distinct impression that whatever this was now revealing its true self. It was not good. Although I never saw an actual spirit, I had the feeling at night that this thing would enter my room and stand by the door near my bed. It would be looking at me and it'd be grinning. Yes, Gecko. It relished the fact that I was terrified. Then more things started to move, and in particular the closet door that would swing open. The temperature would plummet in the room and it would be freezing. Most nights I ran out of my bedroom and I ended up sleeping at the foot of my parents' bed. They were very annoyed and suspected that something was up with this game that had clearly gone out of hand. Even when sleeping in my parents' bedroom, I had the feeling that it came in and would stand close enough that it would terrify me, but not close enough that I would freak out and scream for my parents. Perhaps the scariest thing was it started to turn on electronics. In particular, again, a Game Boy that I had. When activating this game, it would play a melody. This Game Boy was in a drawer. The melody would play over and over and over again, as if somebody was pressing on the on button. As cliche as it sounds, this continued even after I moved the batteries, and, 12-year-old me didn't know any better than to head to a church with an empty water bottle, take holy water and sprinkle it all around the doors and windows of my house. And somehow that worked. Or maybe simply the fact that I was no longer playing the game and this portal or connection or whatever this thing was becoming weaker. After a few months, it finally went away. At least I think it did. I'm now an adult, and I've lived at my parents' house for nearly 2 decades. I sometimes go back for Christmas, but I don't get a sense that there's anything there. I realize this is a little circumstantial, not as dramatic as other stories here, but I figured I'd tell mine too. I figured, here's one to get the ball rolling. Story number 2. Shortly after I was born in 1978, my parents decided to move out of New York City to the suburbs. They figured this would be a better place to raise children. They bought a house in Syosset, New York. The split-level house had 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a dining room, and a kitchen, and a den, which included a fireplace. In addition, there was a partly finished basement with a guest room. There was a billiard room. There was also a bar. The unfinished part of the basement included a boiler room and a heater, and a laundry room, as well as a toilet. We lived in this house until 1986, when my parents realized that living in the city might be better after all. Both of my parents, and particularly my mother, were deeply unhappy there. I remember my parents fighting and my mother crying. This may be that we were like an ethnically diverse family in a largely white, conservative, petite bourgeois town. We've always felt like outsiders there. As early as I can remember, I was terrified of the basement. The area by the bar had a particularly dark, ominous feeling to it. I was also terrified of the main level of the house at night and would rarely leave my room after being put to bed. I realized that this could be chalked up to being a young boy. I'm certainly not convinced that this was something paranormal, but I'll recount some of my stories and those of my family members. Most of the stories of my family members were disclosed years after we moved from the house. It was over Christmas dinner when the wine had made my mother, father, and sister willing to share their own experiences. The earliest memory that I have in my room was waking up to the sound of cackling laughter, like that of a witch. The laughter stopped shortly after I woke up. I clearly remember hearing it. I was petrified and frozen stiff. I was so scared I didn't get out of bed and run to my parents' room. Stayed completely still until I fell asleep again. Of course, this could have been a sort of a hallucination, but it felt so very real. My mother would avoid going down the basement to do laundry alone. Whenever she was down there, she felt something sinister and menacing watching her, eventually coming up behind her as if breathing down her neck. I remember several times hearing her race up the stairs and slam the door to the basement shut. She always claimed that something chased her up those stairs. Indeed, a common feeling people have in basements, haunted or not. My father claimed that when he was home alone, he would hear the billiard ball looped in a triangle break. It was as if somebody was starting a game. He didn't go down to investigate alone, but my mother came home and made up an excuse to go down together. Everything was untouched, both the table and the balls. There was a hamper and a chute that connected the bathroom on the ground floor with the laundry room in the basement. This saved you the trouble of lugging laundry downstairs. This would take your dirty clothes, throw them down the chute, and they would fall and land on the laundry room floor. Whenever I opened the chute door, you could glimpse down to the basement. In my mind's eye, there was always a face looking up menacingly, grinning, taking pleasure in frightening a child. Every time you opened that chute to throw your clothes down, it was as if this thing was waiting for you and staring up. When I disclosed the story to my family over Christmas, that's 20 years later, my sister's eyes got wide and she said, "You felt it too." My parents wouldn't go into detail, but they had the impression that something very bad had happened in that basement, most likely a suicide. My sister and I pressed them for more information, but they refused and played down anything supernatural. After we moved out in 1986, my parents initially had trouble selling the house. We'd go back and check in it from time to time, rake the leaves, clean out the gutters. The empty house had an even worse feeling. We couldn't, close up and get out of there fast enough. Every time we drove away, there was a sense of relief. This house just felt terrible. And that's how that ends. Possession? Not sure what sub to post under. At night while I'm lying in bed, I'll get this extremely intense feeling of anxiety. That's as I'm dozing off. It's a very slow approaching anxiety, almost as if I can feel something getting closer to me. Such a horrible feeling. My heart races. I want to hide underneath my covers. The anxiety is proportionally related to my level of sleepiness. So the higher the anxiety, the harder it is for me to stay awake. In these situations, I do not want to fall asleep. I'll get sleep paralysis and I'll have hallucinations, usually sexually in nature, non-consenting. This scenario just happened again a few minutes ago. Tried to fight off the sleepiness at first, but because it happened so often, I was just kind of oh well, it'll pass. Let's get over it with. Cue the sleep paralysis. Usually during these quote-unquote dreams, I'm usually just lucid and experiencing some kind of sexual act or having something done to me or me performing it on someone. I never really have any control over it. The events just happen. This time it was completely different. I became someone else. It was like I was reliving a moment of this person's life. And for context, I'm a black woman in my 20s. In this dream, I guess, I was suddenly an extremely overweight white male sitting on the side of a bed scrolling on my phone. I may have been looking at some kind of pornographic material, I'm not sure. Quote-unquote, I had respiratory issues because there was suddenly an oxygen machine next to me. I had this horrible cough. I really hate to have to explain this next part, but there was a young girl, a child 8 or 9, sleeping in the bed next to me. I believe she was this guy's sister. It was blah. Okay, they didn't give a warning. I'm going to go ahead and give a warning to skip forward another 30 seconds or so. But my editor will get mad at me if I don't read everything, so I'm going to read it. So, was sleeping in the bed next to me believed she was this guy's sister. He was groping her, she slept, and touching her in extremely inappropriate ways, and then I kind of started to come to my senses and regain my sense of self. I tried to stop touching the girl, but this guy kept taking back over and doing it. It became a battle of will, basically. Whose will is stronger? Mine to stop assaulting the girl and wake up, or his to keep me trapped here and doing this. Like, literally, I was pulling the arm one way and he was pulling the arm the other way. The arm was just stuck in the air at one point because neither of us were letting up. It started to overpower me and I heard the girl crying. It made me start to freak out, which jolted me awake and back into my own body in my own room. Remember, I said the guy had this consistent wheeze and cough, so when I woke up I was still doing that. Then I realized I didn't have any respiratory problem and I didn't need to. Indeed, Gecko. A paranormal event. So to start off, this used to happen often, like on a daily basis. It stopped for some reason on December. My room isn't the biggest. I have a queen-size bed, a large drawer, and a built-in closet. My bed would be under the room's window facing the door, the closet being to the right, drawer to the right too. Well, I usually would cub to music until I drift to sleep. Cub. Which would be around 10 or 11 at most. But this time I was like really vining to the music. I feel very old because I don't understand these words. So I stayed awake. It was around 12:30ish when I felt the bed kind of vibrate like Jurassic World type where it would stop and continue. First I thought I was just fat shaking the bed. About a minute later the vibration got bad and it got to the point where it felt like somebody was punching my bed from the window side. Now keep in mind I had my AirPods in still, but I could hear a faint tap. I was confused thinking it was just a bug or something, but then it hit me. These are noise cancellation, right? Literally took them off and I kid you not, that shit was hard like pounding. Like it would be slowly. Stayed like this for a good minute with me just staring back at the window. Curtains of course were blocking it until the pound stopped. Turned into taps. That's when I was like, hell no. Went underneath the blanket, and I don't know why. Suddenly the rats on my fucking... Excuse me? And suddenly the rats on my fucking started running. I could hear them scratching along the inner walls coming from the window towards my closet. I literally stayed under the blanket until the blanket's heats made me sleep eventually. When I woke up and got ready for school, my mom asked me why I was so sweaty. I told her. Literally all she told was to not open the window, which to me sounds like a pretty obvious thing to me, because what the fuck would I? I just want to know what this could be, because it stopped for a while, but I'm afraid it might come back. Also, I've noticed things in my house are moving, which make me scared thinking that shit came in or something. And although the knocking stopped, there was a day this week where all my dogs started barking towards my window maniacally. Village Ghost. My family's from a rural village in Vietnam. This story was told by my grandparents when I visited them. This happened post-Vietnam War when people from the coastal village were poor. During that time, there was a couple that lived near my grandparents' house. One day, their son went in to get a haircut at the barber. Once he was finished, he returned home, but his father saw him from the door. He was upset about the haircut and wanted to cut it himself. This led to him getting a pair of scissors and chasing him around the house to try to cut his hair. Ran around the house and stumbled upon a landmine. Stepped on it, causing it to detonate. I wasn't sure if it was a landmine or a grenade, since my grandparents don't know the name of it. Caused him to blow up into bits and pieces. My grandma recounted how his intestines were spotted everywhere and the blood stained the house. Later on, the spirit of the man would hide in the trees near the canal in front of my grandparents' house. There would be many accounts of people encountering him when they would be like across at the bridge of the canal. He would taunt them and tease them while they screamed in fear. Many of my family members have told stories of their encounters with the man and how it would taunt them. My great-uncle personally encountered him, is scared to go to sleep at my grandparents' house to this day, scared to walk near the canal by himself. Along with the man, there was a woman that fell in the canal when she was coming back from her work, causing her to die. This has led to many encounters of her when it rains with her hair down and wet. The surrounding area of my grandparents' house has been known to have many ghosts and spirits around, many that died during the war and others that died of unfortunate events. Although now there isn't any, well, I guess there isn't many encounters, some still wander. My paranormal experiences. I'm pretty sure that I used to live on a native burial ground. For context, we lived in rural New York State at the time. That house is from 2016 or early 2022. Most of these experiences took place in the later years of living there. I'll write them as best as I can in chronological order. There were many minor events that happened early on that aren't all that notable and can be fairly easily explained. I'm going to only include the important events. The first event that I recall was when we were playing hide and seek one day. Me and my friend hid in a small cutout area for the exterior cellar door. We were the only ones down there. My brother's friend came down and said that he thought he saw somebody and ran after them. I came out and asked him if he was chasing and told him that it was only the two of us down there. We were all freaked out and went upstairs. The next one also happened in the basement. We were sort of playing ghost hunting. My friend, the same one that I hid with, felt something brush past him. I turned the light on and I tried to convince him that it was just his imagination. But then the light went out. He wasted no time, booked it upstairs. May have been a coincidence, but either way it still freaked us out. The next strange thing was a string of events that happened every night for about a month. I would wake up every night just past 3 a.m. feeling terrified, like I was being watched. Not long before this started happening, I was up late past my bedtime reading. I had my blinds closed, so my parents didn't see my lamp. I was starting to get tired and got into my bed to go to sleep, but as soon as I laid her down, which I think is laid it down, I heard 3 taps on my window. My room's on the 2nd floor and it wasn't windy. There were no trees within about 50 feet of the house. I was freaked out and pulled open the blind to see nothing. There was only one of 2 sleepless nights in that room. The other was when I woke up to hear heavy breathing coming from the other side of the room by the closet. First I thought it was my younger brother who shared a room with me, but it was just too loud. I stood between his bed and the closet and heard the breathing coming from the closet. I woke my brother up and explained the situation. I had him hold a flashlight and shine it when I opened the door. I yanked the sliding door open and the breathing stopped. There's nothing in there, just a dresser and some clothes. I know it wasn't a vent causing it because the only vent was by my bed and this had never happened before. A while after the previous events, me and my sister saw what proved the paranormal was real. We had just got done watching a movie with the family. We were the first ones upstairs other than my youngest sister, who was already asleep. The bathroom was at the very top of the stairs as soon as he got up. Me and my sister were talking, and as we reached the top, we both were about to turn the corner to the bedrooms when we saw a dark figure about the size of my youngest sister walk into the bathroom and close the door. I thought that it was my sister at first. I could only see it sort of out of the corner of my eye, but I looked into her room and she was fast asleep. I looked at my sister with my eyes wide and I said, "You saw that too, right?" She confirmed what I had seen. I busted into the bathroom, flipping on the light and checking every corner. Nothing. We were shocked and just went to bed, not speaking about it due to the fact that everybody would have denied her story. Later we brought this up after my youngest sister wouldn't sleep in her room for a week after seeing a 6-foot-tall shadow figure watching her sleep. She came out of her room screaming one night and went to her parents crying, talking about a monster in her room. In the morning she described it as an all-black, man-shaped figure in the corner of her room. I stood where she said it was, and it was much taller than I was. I was about 5'2" at the time. Me and my sister then shared our story and everybody was freaked out. This happened in the summer of 2020. Right before the summer, I was home alone with my only grandpa. I was out of school because the high school had final exams, so there were a couple of days I was home alone. I went outside to do a chore. I don't really remember what, but I heard a slow thudding coming from the woods. I tried to see what it was, but I wasn't overly concerned by it. Neither was the gecko. Just assumed it was my neighbor's. This wasn't significant until the next summer. I remember the exact date because it was on 9/11/2021. But me, my siblings, and my brother's friend, same one in the first encounter, were out playing in the woods. And these woods are weird. They kind of give an off feeling when you're in them. They had many rock piles, which I assumed were native burials, but didn't want to find out and disturb a grave. Those woods were on the backside of our property, and they were lower in elevation. They were thick, and they always were far cooler than anywhere else, like 20 degrees cooler. I love the woods. I try to be in them as much as possible, but those woods were different. I never ventured too far into them on my own. So, back to the story. We were just playing in the woods, and we were pretty far apart down the wood line, maybe 100 yards or so. We weren't even 100 feet in. I was with my brother, and I had a very, very faint thudding-like sound, like a drum beat. As time went on, it got louder to the point my brother noticed them as well. He asked me if I heard it, and I said yeah. Freaked out, said it was cannibals. I calmed him down, convinced him it wasn't. We were both freaked out. That was because it was coming from deep in the woods where there aren't really houses for miles. The birds also went silent. We went down the wood line, got our sisters and his friend. He told them, and they said that they heard it too. We got out of the woods and just listened by the edge. My brother and his friend went to investigate, but turned around about 50 feet in. They said they looked down the hill and saw it like a native girl crashed at the bottom. They bolted back and told us to run. Went into the house all terrified, but me and my brother and his friend went back out and watched the woods with the binoculars from outside the house. We didn't see anything. And all this time, the drums kept getting steadily louder to the point where they sounded like they were in the yard. Eventually, we heard what sounded like thousands of crows, like going nuts, dogs barking, and it just stopped. It was eerily silent for a minute until the birds started singing again. We wouldn't wrap our heads around it and try to explain what happened, but we just couldn't. These were all the major paranormal experiences that I thought are worth sharing. Almost everything major took place from 2019 to 2021. The music from across the lake. So I can't remember what year it was exactly, but I think it was around 2013. I had been living in Seattle, but I moved back home to my parents' house for a short stay for a few months to get back on my feet before I could move to Tacoma. I came back in late summer, and I was gone in the city after Thanksgiving. During that time, I started to hang out with some folks from the old gang people used to stay after high school. One of the people we hung out with, her grandparents owned a home overlooking a lake. It was awesome. We had some excellent parties there. Now, Ashley, all names changed for privacy, and her family owned this home for a while, since the mid-'80s. She told us about an accident that happened. It was summer in the early 90s, and her father's friend died there. She was fuzzy on the details, but it was a jet ski accident and he drowned in the lake. Apparently, they drug him to shore, but they were too late. I'm not sure if that explains what happened to us, but I just wanted to preface the story with this. It was the late fall of 2013. My friend Chris and I were waiting in our respective girlfriends at the time, getting ready for a Halloween party that night. He was sitting playing some PC game in the corner, and I was watching some horror movie on TV. At this point, it was dark, pretty much pitch black. It was a dry night. I remember I went out back to smoke. Kept hearing a strange noise. The noise sounded like something slapping around in mud or muck. Not a strong thud, but weak just enough to grab my attention. I could hear it coming from around the lake, and at some point my buddy Chris is out here smoking with me. I asked him if he could hear that noise. He said he did, so without really any hesitation, we started to investigate. In some reeds, we found a huge decaying salmon still alive. Its eyes were whited out, and whatever kind of rot it had was affecting its whole body. It was rotting while it was alive. We were baffled. I don't know really much about local flora and fauna, but from what Chris and I both knew, salmon didn't run in that lake. No sea access. Well, that was weird. We choked it up to the magic of Halloween, you know? Weird shit does happen. It wasn't Halloween, but good enough explanation. We just didn't really want to think about that sickening flopping sound. The lady's now finally ready. It was time to move out. We had a good time at my friend's house party, but after we headed back to the lake house, I failed to mention my friend Chris had moved in there recently. It was late, the girls had gone on sleep, but Chris and I were hopelessly addicted to a MOBA called Heroes of New Earth at the time, so we wanted to get into a game. Who cares how many beers we had? During the game, we noticed the windows of the house were opened wide open. It was cold in the house. It's October in Washington State, talking 40 degrees. We had both of our computers set up in the kitchen, since nobody's using the tables for anything, so Chris got up, shut each window. They're the kind of window that slide open from the bottom, so you need to slide the window up to open it. After the game, we went out for a smoke. Pretty common practice for us. As we were getting up, I heard Chris say, "What the hell? I closed these." The windows were back open, wide open like before. I closed them again this time. I saw with my own eyes. We smoked, went back inside of our computer, and we entered the queue for another game. I noticed that once again the windows were opened, like wide again. At this point, we thought it was a friend of ours who was trying to mess with us. A friend who knew we'd be there, too. It was a pretty common hangout spot for all of our friend group. People sort of dropped in all the time. We looked out in the driveway and everything checked out all the normal cars. Chris and I started to get spooked somebody's messing with us, and it wasn't one of our friends. We armed ourselves. Chris had a Big Mag flashlight made out of metal, and I grabbed a big knife out of the kitchen drawer. We thought at this point it was time to go take a look around the house. The fog was starting to come in off the lake. If you've never seen fog creep and stretch, it's a pretty weird thing. It's slow, but almost like in a heartbeat, it's covering the land in wisps, just enough to fool you. That dampens noise, too, so every tree branch you snap under your feet sounds different, like it's just for you to hear. I like that. The flashlight was weak. It was so old that we had a few feet of light, basically. We looked around the house, starting out in front with it. That's where the driveway and everything was, and we looked by the cars. We were checking to see if our cars were fine, and we moved from there to the side of the house where no one was around. And at this point, the light couldn't have been seen. It looked like it was made of smoke. It was just so thick with fog, nothing could be seen. That's when we heard something at first very softly. It was music. A song I've never heard before, slow roll of the piano. Both Chris and I were thrown off by the sound of the music. "You're hearing this music, right?" he asked. "Yeah, man," I said back. We were practically holding hands at this point, standing shoulder to shoulder and like nearing closer to the back door. The music was starting to get louder or just closer to us. Chris, with his flashlight, started looking in all the directions trying to find the source. It sounded like it was coming off of the lake. It was like a boat or something. The fog would part and we'd be able to see something moving. Nothing moved, but the music, like some somber tune, I could really never make out. If I ever heard it again, I would recognize the music. It's never left me. Chris and I were both pretty unnerved by the situation unfolding. We went inside and locked the doors once again. The windows are wide open. Chris closed them, and I remember this so vividly. Chris closed and locked the windows, and he looked white. He turned around and said, "I could hear the music off the lake." We went to bed snuggling in arm with our ladies, and they were none the wiser. The next morning, I remember being woken up by Chris's girlfriend complaining about how cold it was. The windows were left open overnight. Chris and I are still close friends. We discuss this every few years, I would say. We never really landed on what the music was, or what was up with the fish, or even weirder windows. We don't know about if it was connected, or maybe it was that untimely drowning that happened. What I do know is that I never heard the music again, neither did he. Grandpa. So this was around 2010. I was nearing my mid-20s. After my first failed attempt to move out of my parents' house, I returned home from the city to recoup from a failed attempt at being an adult. I was starting to hang out with the old crew from high school, my friend Jay, and my other friend Mark. Now, Mark's parents were decently well off, and they would leave on vacations for long periods of time. This would leave Mark to watch over the house. The house had a history. It was a cute home built by his grandfather in the 40s, if I'm not mistaken. It was built into the side of a hill, so one side it looked like a one-story home. The other side revealed that it's a two-story with a basement. On the larger side of the house had a long wooden staircase leading to the kitchen that was the main of the house. The front door on the short side always stayed locked, since nobody came in that way. The house itself was upstairs. It was fairly normal and big. It had an open kitchen, flowed into the living room, and Mark's bedroom was attached in a hallway in the kitchen. There was an upstairs bedroom, and that's where his parents stayed. The basement had no access from inside the house. Instead, it was accessed from outside, and it had a big sliding wood door that opened up to a fairly spooky basement. It had a very old furnace in it that heated the home. It was huge and had many pipes spidering off it, almost like a tree with a bunch of branches. The layout of the home is important, so try to keep it in mind. Mark's grandpa built that home. He also died in that basement. Apparently he had died while working on one of his many projects down there. He passed many moons before Jay and I started to come by and hang with his grandson. So with all of that being said, one night Mark, Jay, and I were coming home from a local bar. We had a ritual Thursday night to hit the bar for cheap dollar beer night, then back to Mark's place where we would pick out a VHS from his parents' insane collection of VHS tapes and watch one. We'd smoke a joint, hang out, and watch a movie, and honestly, it was always a lot of fun. One night we get back, and it was late summer after midnight. I remember the movie we watched was some terrible movie called Terror Vision. Super campy 80s stuff. We all smoked cigarettes at the time, so we paused the movie and moved out to the kitchen and down the steps outside so we can smoke. When we came back inside, all of the drawers and cabinets in Mark's kitchen were all hanging open. When we walked into the living room, the door leading to outside was open too. Mark couldn't explain it, as he stated nobody ever comes through that door. We always kept it locked. Maybe not a direct quote. It's been 14 years since this has passed, but you get the picture. We all armed ourselves with stuff that we could find laying around. I think I had a cane or an umbrella. We didn't think it was a ghost. Maybe a friend messing with us, or maybe even a burglar. We went through the whole house and nothing, not a soul. We joked that Mark maybe is a ghost, and that's when they told us about Grandpa. So from then out, mostly just joking, we said that it was just Grandpa coming to visit. Nothing else happened that evening. Talked about it a few times, but nothing major. Then in the early fall, late September, maybe early October, Mark and I were hanging out, and Jay was on his way over, and we were going to go to our local drive-in a movie theater. Wanted to see what was playing that night. So it was golden hour, the sun was starting to fade, but not before pouring gold all across the land. Mark and I were inside watching The Simpsons. That's when we heard a familiar noise. We heard somebody coming up the big wooden steps from outside. Got up to greet Jay in the kitchen getting her cigarettes ready. We got there and there's nothing. Jay's truck wasn't out there, just her cars, and nobody's at the door or on the steps. We decided, okay, that's pretty weird. We went back to the living room, Simpsons still playing. Pretty much as soon as we sat down, we heard the steps again, this time heading back down. Thinking about it still gives me the chills. Mark and I looked at each other this time, and he said, "Let's get out of here." I said, "Yep." We got up and left from the front door because didn't want to even entertain the thought of leaving through the kitchen. And nothing like that ever happened again. Now, I'm not super believer in anything. Most things can be explained with some rational thought. I've been through them all before, and this was one thing in my life that I just can't really make any logical sense out of. Maybe it was just Grandpa coming to visit. Seemingly supernatural help in a graveyard near me. A few years ago, I was trying to find my granddad, great-granddad, my nan, and step-nan's grave on my father's side. I spent over 2 hours looking. I was giving up and I prayed for help. A leaf fell from a tree. It moved very strangely. It was spiraling supernaturally slowly toward the right, quite a distance away. It landed on a grave, one of 100. It was the correct one, my nan and step-nan's grave. This was in midsummer, so you don't get many leaf droppings. My wife even witnessed this. And actually, in the same graveyard 30 years before, I went with my mom and dad, and the same thing happened. Couldn't find the graves. 2 years later, my mom prayed, and a black cat jumped up onto a fence from a garden on the outside of the graveyard. It just stopped, and it looked at us. And then, it proceeded to jump down and walk to a grave and sat there looking at us. And it was my great-granddad's grave. I just feel like life is more than what we think it is. Very short, but sweet and to the point. I love it. Think my dad tried to contact me when he died. On the day my father died, I was in the car park at my workplace walking in. I had this rage come over me. It was not rational. It was over-the-top angry, not like me at all. I'm very calm normally. I worked a couple of hours, then suddenly I had this feeling come over me of a great, great emptiness inside me. The most awful feeling of loss. This included a pressure pushing like really hard just above the center of my eyes. I guess that's where they say the third eye is located. It was strong enough it made me stop what I was doing, and I just stared off into space feeling like I was looking into a void. Then a couple of minutes later I had a call on the tannoy, it's a speaker system, to ring the office. And that's when I was told to go get to the hospital. My dad was there. When I got there, he was already dead. Never had anything like that before or since, especially the feeling of a void or emptiness suddenly enveloping me. Anybody else has this feeling, especially the pressure in the middle of your forehead? Yep. Something touched my husband's leg last night. My husband just told me that something touched his leg last night. It wasn't a tap, it was a graze under the blanket. We sleep with separate blankets because he's a blanket hog. He'll wrap himself into a burrito and there's no way to even get inside the blanket when he's tucked in that way. Our 2 dogs sleep with us. They take turns squeezing in between us. One of our cats also sleep with us, but he's usually on top of me. Again, he's a human burrito at night. Can't get him out of it until he gets up and unwraps himself. We moved into this house 4 years ago. A year after we moved in, my brother was house sitting, and he said that he heard running and laughing in her room. We were across the country. He was the only one in the house with 2 dogs who were in the guest room with him. That was when he heard the noises. My brother decided to take my dogs to his house because he was scared to sleep in the house after he heard the running and laughing. Also, since we moved into this house, 3 of our pets have died from mysterious causes. My cat, who was healthy one day, was dead under the bed after the day next. My dog, healthy and bouncy, started vomiting and showing signs of bloat. Even though he was home all day, he didn't get into the trash or didn't run marathons before, like eating and drinking. Then recently, one of my cats was found in my drawer, curled up like she used to do when she would take a nap. And this time she didn't move when I picked her up. Also doesn't help that the house number's 13, huh? We have a cat room where the cat's bowls, water fountain, and the little robot are located. But for some reason our cats would rather hang out with us and only go in the cat room to eat, drink, and use the bathroom. The dogs all go in there as well. We've already planned on abandoning the place since our recent cat died because 3 deaths in a 4-year span is not normal. We booked a 3-month stay and an extended stay, and we've almost packed up all of our clothes and other items that we don't want to leave. mostly artwork and pictures and souvenirs. I've also been getting unusually sick since moving here. I have schizoaffective disorder too. I hear voices, but I was always able to shut them out. Now they're louder. Went to the cardiologist last week and the doctor was doing her thing with my calves, and when she squeezed one of my calves, I told her it hurt. She referred me to a vascular doctor to check for possible blood clots. The heart rate was 117 that was when hooked up to the EKG. She wrote another referral to get a CT scan for possible calcium around my heart. We're stumped. Can't leave until October 1st because that's when my ESOP distribution will come. Whatever this thing is trying to kick us out of the house. I hope you guys got out of there. My only paranormal experience. Trigger warning. Domestic abuse is mentioned once. Keeping it vague to make it anonymous. My grandmother was a very strong-willed person. She could do anything that she set her mind to, and I always was very impressed by her. The thing is, I was always aware from a young age that she didn't like my father, probably because he hid my mother. That would do it. My grandmother fell ill, and after some time in a nursing home, a shadow of her former self, she passed away. Truthfully, it was a blessing because she was suffering. But two things happened the day she passed away. A very old clock that we had owned for 30-plus years stopped, never worked again. Personal belonging of my father's that was always kept in the same place went missing. It was later found in the back of a cupboard that had no reason to be in. It was bizarre. I like to think my grandmother was playing a prank on my father from beyond the grave. Yeah, me too. Wired experience in a hotel room. So I was away for a vacation in a different state with my date, and we met 2 months before. As usual, when we reached the city, we'd check in the hotel and ordered the room. I was too tired after driving. We had dinner, then we went to sleep. As soon as I went to sleep, I started feeling uneasiness in my chest. Thought it was due to food. Thought about going for a little bit of a walk alone. When I was walking, I saw a random lady on the street, which I had just glanced at. Came back to my hotel while walking in the lobby, and I saw that strange lady again. Thought maybe she's hotel staff or something, then I laid my bed. As soon as I went to sleep, I could see the lady in my dreams, and her point of view. She came inside the room and was watching both of us sleep. Then she started crawling on the bed. I could even feel compression on the mattress, and this dream continued for a long time. Her crawling on the mattress and me seeing that lady's point of view. I got shit scared that night and checked out next morning, obviously. Can't tell my date about that. So I made up some excuse on hotel staff behavior and we left our other hotel. Things got sorted out there, and since I'm writing this story, I'm still getting goosebumps. My 6-year-old is having nighttime visitors. I have a long history in life of my own personal, supernatural, paranormal experiences, good and bad. However, this is not something I discuss with my kids. I tend to follow the when they ask the question, they're ready for the answer policy on most topics. It's just never come up, especially with my little 6-year-old daughter. She and her 11-year-old sister share a room, but she goes to bed about an hour earlier. She has a bedtime ritual of a song and some hugs. We did our song. I leaned over and hugged her and cupped her cheek with my hands, so I told her I loved her and rubbed it a little bit. When I stood up to leave, she grabbed my hand and said something. At night, somebody rubs her cheek just like that. She thought it was her sister. When she opens her eyes to see who it is, she sees her sister in bed and nobody else in the room. She said that she thought maybe it was me, maybe not, if it's not her sister, but I'm never there. I asked her if it was always like a kind, loving touch like that. She said yes. I said, well, as long as it's a loving feeling, there's nothing to worry about. And that's okay, and left it at that. I told her if she ever feels uncomfortable or unsafe at night, she can always come wake me. She showed no signs of alarm. I then went to ask her sister if by chance she was ever touching her sister as she sleeps. Her reaction seemed kind of perplexed. She said, "No, why would I do that?" I just said, "I don't know," just asked and moved on. Their beds are across the room from one another, so no accidental touch is really possible. This obviously bothers me a bit. I'm glad that whatever's visiting is using a loving touch, so the idea of a relative comes to mind, but I was also kind of hit with a wave of violation, though, feeling like I don't want her being approached by a spirit or being that I kind of visualize being like something guarding her, like a boundary saying she's off limits. Still thinking about this 2 days later, though, and looking for input. Hearing boyfriend's voice in sudden gust of wind. I was in bed sleeping. My boyfriend had already left for work. I sleep with a compression mask for my frequent headaches, so I wasn't able to see anything. When I awoke a few hours later, I woke up to my boyfriend's voice in front of me, asking if he could borrow my headphones. They're kept on the bed frame behind me. It's a shelf-type bed frame, so I'd have to take the mask off and look behind me to get it. But I felt off. I remembered him leaving for work earlier that morning. Felt like I responded and said, "Sure." But there was no response, and then I stayed still, and my anxiety rose. All of a sudden I felt and I heard a huge gust of wind, like it was funneling around me, and my ears popped. I laid still for a second, and then I took my mask off, and nothing and no one was there. Felt pretty off since, and I don't really know what that was, or if it was actually anything at all. I know I could have been dreaming it, but it felt so real, like too real. I've never had a dream that vivid before. I rarely ever even remember my dreams. Like I said, I'm normally not one to jump or to think of the paranormal. It's curious. Dream of killing a hellhound. It spoke to me. So many thoughts running through my head now. There was an elderly man and woman, and the man got attacked. They were married. I didn't know them, though. I tried to keep the woman safe, and there was nothing I could do to help the man. They assumed that I killed him. Suddenly, the hound's dead, but the door I was trying to keep shut made a hole. I could see its red eye moving wildly. It locked in on me and burst the door open. Then it broke through the door and took a knife, cut its head open. Oddly, I wasn't afraid at all, but the woman was in a full panic. The second hound came in and I killed that one also. Wasn't touched at all by the hounds. The hounds could speak and they told me, "I will teach you to fight," in a deep, ferocious, angry tone. It didn't actually seem angry, if that makes sense. It felt like a test, maybe a test of fear and attachment. After I killed them, they could still stalk and seemed to applaud me for killing them and not feeling fear. In an earlier part of the dream, I tried to warn the elderly man that it seemed that there were a lot of bears and wolves around the cabin. He said, I'm not worried. Never looked into the idea of hellhounds, really. Wish I hadn't have had afterwards, because now it's got me freaked out. What could it mean? Any help or thoughts? Rental house that had, possibly, 2 spirits. When I was younger, say like 10, my family moved into this rental house. Not uncommon for us since my dad was in the military at the time. Not long after we moved in, we started experiencing things in the house. We would see things, hear things, and find things. As well as my parents' relationship taking a very bad turn. Arguing all the time, basically couldn't even be around each other. We learned later that the couple who lived there before us had split while they were living there as well. Same thing with the 2 families after us. My family has theories about the house. Almost all of us have had experiences there. My sister and I would see a little girl. My mom woke up one night to a shadow staring at her from the corner. We were all kind of sick in that house a lot too. I could make a whole other post for the experiences that we had in that house, but the gist of it is that there was something very hateful there. remember finding a photo of a little girl in my parents' closet, probably 11. She was wearing a cheerleading uniform. My younger brother found a wedding ring in the house. The thing in that house really seemed to be targeting my parents, just trying to tear them apart. It was very weird. The most prominent experiences were: 1. My sister and I shared a room. She woke up one night that she heard somebody trying to open the door. She sat up, saw what thought I guess was me struggling with the doorknob. But then she looked towards my bed and saw me asleep in it. I get goosebumps now thinking about being there. 2. As stated above, my mom's seen the shadow figure. My mom's always been a target of paranormal activity. Her great-grandmother was a medium, and I think she is too. So she knows that the shadow figure was mostly hatred. 3. My dog got sick and we had to bring her to the house. She was a farm dog that stayed in her farm. She wouldn't set foot in the house. I tried to lead her in, but she just wouldn't do it. Bad as she was feeling, she was frightened. I ended up picking her up to bring her through to the back porch, and that dog wouldn't stop screaming the whole way through the house. She knew something was up. Passed away 2 days later. 4. I was about to take a shower in my parents' bathroom when all of a sudden I got the feeling like I wasn't alone. Like you could see the shower through the mirror and it had one of those fogged glass doors. I swear to this day that I saw a shadow move behind that glass. Wrapped myself in a towel and hightailed it to the other bathroom. All in all, one of the most active places I've lived. I don't even hate paranormal activity, but I was a bad one to live there. And for anybody still listening, thanks so much for staying through to this part. Whether you're asleep or awake, hopefully I'll see you later. See ya.